Rain hammered the windows of Miami International Airport long before boarding began that evening. Travelers rushed through Terminal B carrying coffee cups, rolling suitcases, and private worries nobody else noticed. Flight 22136 to Chicago was already delayed 37 minutes because severe storms covered the southeastern skies. 16-year-old Benjamin Townsend sat alone beside Gate B-22, holding a worn backpack against his chest protectively. His grey t-shirt looked faded from too many laundromat washes inside cheap apartment complexes across Miami neighborhoods. Most passengers ignored him completely, though several glanced twice before quickly looking away again afterward. Benjamin had learned those looks during 12 brutal years inside Florida's overcrowded foster care system already. Adults judged the holes inside his sneakers before hearing a single thoughtful word from his quiet mouth. Teachers called him distracted because he sketched airplane engines instead of taking ordinary classroom notes during lectures. Foster parents called him strange because he memorized aviation manuals beneath blankets after midnight while exhausted children slept. Only one man ever truly understood him completely. Captain Earl Davis entered Benjamin's life 14 months earlier inside a neglected Overtown Community Recreation Center downtown. Davis had served 32 combat missions, flying Air Force transport aircraft through terrifying conditions across hostile foreign territories. Retirement left silver inside his hair, but never weakened the discipline behind his steady, commanding voice afterward. The old pilot discovered Benjamin studying an outdated Airbus systems manual beside broken basketball equipment one Saturday. He asked 10 difficult technical questions, expecting nervous silence from another struggling neighborhood teenager seeking temporary attention. Benjamin answered every question correctly without hesitation, then corrected one outdated specification inside the manual afterward. Captain Davis stared quietly before speaking 5 unforgettable words. "I'm going to teach you properly." Since then, Benjamin spent every weekend inside a donated A320 simulator hidden beneath flickering fluorescent community center lights. He learned emergency procedures, crosswind landings, hydraulic failures, instrument navigation, and engine recovery techniques. While wealthy teenagers attended beach parties elsewhere throughout southern Florida, nobody outside Overtown knew his name. Tonight changed everything forever. Boarding finally began shortly after 8:30, beneath another violent burst of thunder shaking terminal windows across the concourse. Benjamin joined the final boarding group, carrying only his backpack and Captain Davis's carved wooden airplane model carefully. The tiny A320 rested inside his pocket like a sacred promise protecting dreams nobody else respected seriously. A businessman near the jet bridge glanced backward nervously after noticing Benjamin approaching behind his expensive luggage carefully. A mother pulled her young daughter closer without speaking while scanning Benjamin's worn clothing suspiciously beneath fluorescent lighting. Benjamin kept walking quietly because humiliation had become familiar territory long before adolescence arrived mercilessly. Seat 34F waited beside the lavatory near the aircraft's rear section, where uncomfortable economy passengers disappeared unnoticed. Benjamin slid beside the rain-covered window while fastening his seatbelt carefully across trembling, nervous legs underneath. Outside, lightning-illuminated baggage workers loading containers through sheets of endless cold rain onto the aircraft. For the first time during his difficult young life, Benjamin finally sat aboard a real airplane tonight personally. 3 rows ahead, an elegant older woman wearing pearl earrings turned slowly toward him with visible disgust. Her expression darkened immediately after noticing his backpack held together using silver strips of duct tape. Benjamin suddenly understood the flight had not even departed yet, but trouble already found him somehow. Pamela Hargrove had spent 63 years building a life insulated from uncomfortable realities surrounding ordinary Americans. Her Palm Beach mansion overlooked private beaches, guarded by security patrols and expensive landscaping crews every afternoon. She served proudly on charity boards, discussing poverty during catered luncheons beside wealthy retired executives and politicians. Yet she feared people like Benjamin Townsend instinctively. Pamela watched him settle beside the rear window while silently judging every visible detail about his appearance. His sneakers looked exhausted from years of walking across cracked sidewalks beneath Miami summer heat and storms. The backpack resting against his knees appeared one hard tug away from falling apart completely forever. She pressed the call button sharply. Karen Bellows approached with practiced airline politeness, masking obvious exhaustion after 12 working hours already inside turbulent conditions. At 48, Karen carried herself with military stiffness developed through decades handling demanding travelers across crowded American flights routinely. Her blonde hair remained perfectly pinned despite worsening weather, rattling the aircraft repeatedly outside during boarding. Pamela lowered her voice without lowering her contempt. "Please verify that boy belongs on this aircraft," she whispered coldly beside Karen's shoulder near row 33. Karen glanced briefly toward Benjamin before forcing another professional smile carefully across tired facial muscles afterward. "Ma'am, every passenger boards with valid documentation before entering the aircraft," she explained patiently, despite obvious irritation underneath her controlled tone. Pamela folded her arms tightly across her cream-colored blazer with offended superiority radiating through her entire posture visibly. "I understand procedures perfectly," she replied sharply while adjusting expensive pearl earrings beneath dim cabin lighting. "I'm simply saying mistakes happen constantly nowadays across airports and government systems everywhere recently." Benjamin heard every painful word clearly from 3 rows behind their conversation, unfolding slowly before other passengers. Years inside foster homes trained him recognizing humiliation before insults fully reached their intended emotional destination afterward. He stared quietly through the rain-covered window while pretending distant thunder interested him more than human cruelty. Then another passenger interrupted unexpectedly. Grace Anderson sat across the aisle wearing navy blue nursing scrubs beneath a lightweight Atlanta Falcons sweatshirt casually afterward. She looked around 40 years old with tired but compassionate eyes shaped by countless overnight hospital emergencies already. Grace leaned slightly toward Benjamin before speaking softly enough, avoiding unnecessary public attention surrounding the ugly confrontation. "Don't let miserable people steal your excitement tonight," she said warmly, while offering a small, reassuring smile carefully. "First flights should feel magical regardless what anybody else thinks about your shoes or background." Benjamin finally smiled faintly, despite the embarrassment burning painfully beneath his calm expression throughout the cabin afterward. "Thank you, Ma'am," he answered quietly while tightening both hands around his worn backpack protectively once again. Boarding completed moments later, beneath another violent flash illuminating the storm-covered runway outside dramatically through windows everywhere. Captain Ronald Beckett's voice filled the cabin calmly over intercom speakers while passengers settled nervously into uncomfortable seats afterward. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2136 with non-stop service from Miami to Chicago this evening." Benjamin recognized confidence inside Beckett's steady voice immediately. Because experienced pilots always sounded comfortable during difficult weather conditions naturally. Captain Davis taught him listening carefully revealed everything important about someone's abilities before witnessing actions personally afterward. The Airbus pushed backward from the gate while rain hammered metal surfaces across the aircraft relentlessly through darkness outside. Engines roared louder gradually until vibrations traveled upward through Benjamin's seat directly into his chest underneath. Every instrument light glowing beyond the cockpit represented years of private dreams surviving despite abandonment, racism, hunger, and endless institutional neglect afterward. For several beautiful minutes, Benjamin forgot every cruel thing ever spoken against him completely inside that aircraft cabin. The plane accelerated down slick runway pavement before lifting smoothly above Miami's glowing coastline, disappearing beneath massive storm clouds slowly. Benjamin pressed his forehead gently against the cold window, while city lights scattered below like golden rivers afterward. Then Pamela Hargrove screamed suddenly. "My purse feels lighter," she announced loudly enough, silencing nearby conversations immediately throughout several surrounding economy rows afterward. "I had $300 before boarding this flight earlier tonight exactly." Her eyes moved directly toward Benjamin. Karen Bellows turned slowly around the aisle, already sensing disaster approaching once again through mounting passenger tension nearby. Pamela pointed openly toward Benjamin's seat, without embarrassment or hesitation, before speaking another sentence, poisoning the entire cabin atmosphere instantly. "Search his bag immediately," she demanded coldly. "Everybody here knows exactly what happened to my money already." Benjamin felt every eye around him suddenly become sharp, suspicious, and terrifyingly familiar, once again beneath flickering cabin lights. The cabin became painfully quiet after Pamela Hargrove's accusation spread across nearby rows, slowly like poisonous smoke everywhere. Even restless children stopped talking while passengers turned toward Benjamin with uncomfortable curiosity and immediate suspicion. Rain rattled violently against the fuselage while turbulence shook drink cups beside frightened travelers throughout economy seating. Karen Bellows approached row 34, carrying professional authority hardened through decades, handling difficult airline confrontations across America routinely. Her polished smile disappeared completely before reaching Benjamin's seat beside the narrow rain-covered window afterward. Years working commercial flights taught Karen trusting wealthy passengers usually protected careers more effectively than defending vulnerable strangers publicly. "Stand up and open your backpack," Karen ordered firmly, while several passengers leaned forward, watching the humiliation eagerly nearby. Benjamin looked upward slowly, disbelief mixing painfully with exhausted resignation across his young expression underneath harsh cabin lighting. "You seriously think I stole something?" he asked quietly, despite knowing explanations rarely mattered during moments like these. Pamela crossed her arms triumphantly 3 rows ahead, without attempting concealment, regarding her obvious satisfaction throughout the confrontation unfolding. "People carrying stolen money always ask emotional questions first," she announced loudly enough, ensuring surrounding passengers heard every poisonous word afterward. Grace Anderson rose halfway from her seat immediately. "This is ridiculous," she protested firmly while glaring toward Pamela with visible disgust across her tired, compassionate features afterward. "You cannot accuse teenagers because they wear inexpensive clothes during commercial flights across this country anymore." Karen avoided Grace's eyes entirely. "Ma'am, please remain seated," she replied stiffly before returning attention toward Benjamin once more carefully afterward. "Sir, cooperate now, or airport police will meet this aircraft after landing tonight immediately." Benjamin understood resistance would only worsen everything dramatically from painful personal experience developed across countless foster homes already. He stood slowly while keeping movements calm despite humiliation burning through his chest beneath dozens of judgmental passenger stares nearby. His hands trembled slightly, opening the backpack. Inside rested exactly 4 possessions worth protecting throughout his difficult young life currently. 2 folded T-shirts, 1 library book covering advanced aerodynamics and emergency flight recovery procedures for commercial aircraft systems, extensively afterward. A small toothbrush wrapped carefully inside paper towels, beside inexpensive deodorant purchased from a Miami convenience store earlier, and Captain Davis's carved wooden Airbus model. Karen searched everything thoroughly while passengers watched Benjamin, like dangerous evidence, might suddenly appear among his few belongings afterward. She unzipped every pocket, inspected each item, then slowly looked upward again without finding anything remotely suspicious. Silence filled the row awkwardly. Benjamin reached carefully toward the wooden airplane, resting near Karen's hand before she could mishandle the precious object accidentally. Captain Davis carved the model personally after Benjamin completed advanced simulator emergency training successfully 3 months earlier throughout Overtown weekends together. 5 words remained etched beneath its wooden wings permanently. "The sky doesn't care what color you are." Karen finally zipped the backpack closed without apology. "Nothing was found," she announced flatly before stepping backward into the aisle uncomfortably afterward. Pamela huffed dismissively while adjusting her blazer sleeves irritably beneath flickering overhead lights nearby. "Then he probably hid the cash somewhere else earlier," she muttered loudly, despite overwhelming evidence proving Benjamin completely innocent already. Several nearby passengers laughed nervously. Benjamin sat back beside the window without speaking another word throughout the cabin afterward. Humiliation settled across his shoulders, heavier than physical weight, while thunder boomed violently beyond dark storm clouds surrounding the aircraft outside. Grace leaned across the aisle quietly. "You handled that with more dignity than most adults ever could," she whispered sincerely, while offering tissues discreetly afterward. Benjamin nodded once, but kept staring through rain-covered glass toward endless black skies beyond the wing outside silently. He refused crying before strangers who already expected weakness from someone resembling him throughout modern America constantly. 3 rows ahead, Captain Ronald Beckett rubbed his chest again inside the cockpit, while monitoring worsening weather patterns carefully. Pain spread deeper beneath his left shoulder every passing minute, despite swallowing antacid tablets before departure from Miami earlier tonight. Co-pilot Craig Jennings noticed the captain breathing harder during turbulence, but assumed exhaustion caused temporary discomfort naturally. At 28, Jennings recently completed Airbus certification after years flying smaller regional aircraft across southern states routinely. Neither pilot recognized danger approaching rapidly. Meanwhile, Benjamin traced the carved words beneath the wooden airplane, secretly hidden inside his backpack, once again afterward. Captain Davis repeated those same words after every difficult training session throughout 14 exhausting months together carefully. "The sky judges skill, son," Davis always reminded him quietly beneath humming simulator lights afterward. "People judge appearances because appearances require less courage than truth." Another violent burst of turbulence suddenly rocked the aircraft hard enough, sending startled screams across several surrounding economy rows instantly. Overhead compartments rattled, while cabin lights flickered twice beneath the growing electrical storm surrounding Flight 2136, dangerously. Benjamin looked upward immediately. Something about that movement felt terribly wrong. Benjamin felt the difference immediately because Captain Davis trained him, recognizing dangerous turbulence patterns through simulator repetitions endlessly. Ordinary turbulence rolled through aircraft rhythmically, like waves striking shorelines during difficult weather conditions naturally. This movement felt violent, uneven, mechanical, almost wounded beneath the shaking metal fuselage surrounding terrified passengers. Another explosive jolt slammed through the cabin without warning suddenly. The Airbus dropped sharply several hundred feet before stabilizing again beneath screaming engine noise echoing throughout the aircraft afterward. Passengers cried openly now, while drinks splashed across tray tables and expensive clothing everywhere nearby. Oxygen masks remained secured overhead, but fear already filled the cabin thicker than smoke afterward. Benjamin closed his eyes briefly. He listened carefully. The left engine sounded normal, despite the storm surrounding Flight 2136 aggressively through black clouds and lightning outside currently. Strong, steady, balanced. But the right engine produced irregular vibrations rising and falling beneath the storm noise constantly afterward. Grinding, coughing, struggling. Benjamin's stomach tightened instantly. Compressor stall, stage 2, possibly worsening already. He opened his eyes immediately, while another severe vibration shook seats across economy class violently beneath flickering overhead lights afterward. Most passengers heard only terrifying engine sounds, mixed with thunder and panic around them currently. Benjamin heard technical failure unfolding second by second beneath the aircraft's skin instead. The intercom crackled suddenly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated," Craig Jennings announced nervously, while trying desperately sounding calm through obvious fear afterward. "We're experiencing unexpected severe turbulence while crossing a weather system over northern Alabama tonight." Benjamin knew immediately Jennings was lying. This wasn't turbulence anymore. The aircraft briefly stabilized while lightning illuminated endless storm clouds outside like exploding white fire across darkness suddenly. Benjamin watched flight attendants gripping seats for balance while exchanging terrified glances nobody else seemed noticing throughout the chaos nearby. Then the cockpit door opened. Karen Bellows rushed inside quickly before reappearing 12 seconds later with completely transformed facial expression afterward. Her professional composure vanished entirely beneath raw, uncontrolled terror, spreading visibly across pale features currently. Another flight attendant grabbed Karen's arm. "What's happening?" she whispered urgently beside the forward galley, while passengers strained overhearing fragments nearby afterward. Karen swallowed hard before answering. "The captain collapsed," she breathed shakily. "Craig can barely hold the aircraft steady alone right now." Passengers nearest the galley overheard immediately. Panic spread faster than wildfire afterward. A woman began praying loudly beside row 19, while another passenger demanded emergency explanations from terrified flight attendants nearby. The businessman who earlier laughed during Benjamin's humiliation now gripped both armrests, sweating heavily beneath his expensive golf shirt afterward. Benjamin unbuckled his seatbelt slowly. Grace Anderson noticed first. "Benjamin, sit down," she urged quietly, while another violent drop shook screaming passengers throughout surrounding rows afterward. "You could get seriously hurt walking during this storm right now." Benjamin ignored the warning completely. Every emergency simulator lesson returned instantly beneath the chaos surrounding Flight 2136, dangerously through worsening weather conditions outside currently. Captain Davis trained him repeatedly, handling engine failures, combined with incapacitated pilots, during catastrophic storm approaches nationwide. Stay calm when everyone else collapses. Trust procedures before emotions. Listen carefully because aircraft communicate through movement constantly. Benjamin stood upright despite violent turbulence, threatening balance across the shaking aisle beneath flickering emergency lights afterward. Passengers stared openly while he moved steadily toward the front cabin, holding overhead seats carefully during each dangerous step. An older man grabbed Benjamin's wrist suddenly. "Kid, where exactly do you think you're going?" he shouted fearfully above surrounding screams and thunder afterward. Benjamin gently removed the man's trembling hand without anger. "Toward the cockpit," he answered calmly, before continuing forward through terrified passengers lining the aisle nearby afterward. Karen Bellows saw him approaching immediately. Fear twisted instantly back into hostility. She stepped directly before the cockpit entrance, while turbulence nearly threw both sideways against surrounding galley walls afterward. Her face burned with anger, exhaustion, and pure survival instinct beneath flashing emergency lights currently. "Absolutely not," Karen snapped sharply, while shoving Benjamin backward against beverage carts beside the galley afterward. "What kind of sick game are you playing right now?" Benjamin steadied himself carefully. The aircraft suddenly dropped again. Passengers screamed louder than before. Karen pointed furiously toward the rear cabin. "Go back to your seat immediately," she hissed through clenched teeth beside the partially opened cockpit door afterward. "A filthy little brat like you thinks he belongs anywhere near this cockpit during an emergency." Benjamin stared directly into her frightened eyes, without flinching once beneath flashing cabin lights around them afterward. Then he spoke quietly. "Your right engine has a Stage 2 compressor stall," he said steadily, while another violent vibration shook the aircraft dangerously. "Your captain is either unconscious or dead already. The co-pilot has limited Airbus experience and overcorrects during every descent input currently." Karen froze completely. Benjamin stepped closer. "If you don't move away from this door within 30 seconds, he continued calmly, "everyone aboard this airplane dies tonight." Karen Bellows stared at Benjamin as another burst of turbulence slammed violently through the aircraft beneath terrifying thunder outside afterward. Her breathing became shallow while fear battled disbelief across exhausted features illuminated by emergency floor lighting currently. Nothing about the teenager before her matched years of assumptions shaping professional instincts throughout countless commercial flights nationwide. Then the cockpit alarm screamed again. A harsh electronic warning echoed through the partially opened door beside Karen, while another violent engine vibration shook surrounding galley equipment dangerously afterward. Craig Jennings shouted something inside the cockpit that neither Karen nor nearby passengers understood completely through storm noise currently. Benjamin stepped closer carefully. "Move," he repeated quietly while maintaining terrifying calm beneath the surrounding chaos unfolding across Flight 2136 afterward. Karen hesitated only 2 seconds, then she moved aside. Benjamin entered the cockpit immediately. Lightning exploded across the windshield, revealing endless black storm clouds swallowing the Airbus completely through sheets of rain afterward. Instrument panels flashed amber and red warning lights, while alarms competed against thunder surrounding the aircraft constantly. Captain Ronald Beckett slumped motionless inside the left seat, with grey skin and closed eyes beneath oxygen masks currently. Craig Jennings gripped the controls desperately. Sweat poured across his face, while both shaking hands fought, keeping the aircraft level through violent crosswinds and engine instability afterward. At 28, Jennings suddenly looked much younger beneath flashing cockpit warnings and overwhelming fear surrounding him currently. He turned furiously after noticing Benjamin. "Who allowed him inside here?" Jennings shouted while another dangerous drop triggered proximity alarms throughout the cockpit immediately afterward. Benjamin ignored the hostility completely. His eyes moved rapidly across flight instruments, exactly like Captain Davis trained during endless simulator emergencies back in Overtown afterward. Altitude dropping too quickly, airspeed unstable, right engine nearly gone, autopilot struggling, compensate against worsening wind shear surrounding the aircraft currently. Then the automated warning system announced coldly, sink rate, pull up." Jennings panicked instantly. He yanked backward hard on the controls. The aircraft nose climbed aggressively upward before airspeed collapsed dangerously beneath stall thresholds throughout the cockpit instruments afterward. Stick shakers rattled violently while warning alarms multiplied across flashing displays surrounding both pilots currently. Benjamin reacted immediately. "Ease forward 2 degrees," he ordered sharply while grabbing the seat behind Jennings for balance afterward. "Add controlled thrust from the left engine only. You're stalling the aircraft trying escape descent too aggressively." Jennings hesitated. Another alarm screamed louder. Benjamin raised his voice. "Do it now." Something inside Jennings finally cracked. Fear overpowered ego completely. He followed Benjamin's instructions precisely while adjusting controls with trembling, desperate hands beneath flashing cockpit lights afterward. The aircraft nose lowered slightly before airspeed recovered gradually into safer margins once again. The violent stick shaking stopped. Silence lasted 3 fragile seconds. Jennings turned slowly toward Benjamin afterward. "How exactly do you know all this?" he whispered hoarsely, while staring at the teenager beside him unbelievably. Benjamin looked briefly toward Captain Beckett's motionless body before answering carefully. 212 simulator hours on the A320, he explained calmly while monitoring unstable engine instruments continuously afterward. Advanced emergency procedures, engine failures, crosswind landings, storm approaches. Jennings blinked repeatedly. "You're saying somebody trained you flying commercial aircraft systems before graduating high school?" "Captain Earl Davis trained me," Benjamin answered simply. Another loud bang interrupted them suddenly. The right engine failed completely. Every cockpit light flashed red afterward, while the aircraft yawed violently toward dead engine drag through screaming wind outside currently. Jennings cursed loudly while fighting controls desperately beneath another terrifying proximity warning immediately afterward. Benjamin moved closer toward the center console. "You need declare Mayday immediately," he ordered firmly while studying instrument failures across multiple displays afterward. "And Captain Beckett must be moved away from primary controls before another descent hits us again." Jennings stared toward the unconscious captain beside him silently. Reality finally crushed denial completely. Outside the cockpit, passengers screamed during another sharp drop, throwing unsecured bags across aisles and seats violently afterward. Grace Anderson appeared near the doorway while helping injured passengers remain calm throughout growing panic behind the cabin currently. She looked inside once, then froze. Captain Beckett's lifeless body explained everything immediately. Grace entered quietly before checking the captain's pulse beneath trembling emergency lighting afterward. Her experienced nurse instincts moved efficiently despite the surrounding nightmare swallowing Flight 22136 through violent storms currently. After several painful seconds, she looked upward slowly toward Benjamin and Jennings. Then she shook her head once. No words necessary, Captain Ronald Beckett was dead. Another violent burst of turbulence nearly threw everyone sideways throughout the cockpit immediately afterward. Jennings gripped controls desperately, while panic overwhelmed every remaining fragment of confidence inside his terrified expression currently. Benjamin understood something terrifying clearly during that exact moment. The co-pilot could not land this airplane alone, and somewhere beneath endless black storm clouds outside, 174 terrified souls unknowingly depended entirely upon a 16-year-old foster kid from Overtown suddenly. Craig Jennings stared at Benjamin Townsend while rain exploded across cockpit windows like machine gun fire from darkness outside afterward. Every instinct from commercial aviation training screamed this situation violated regulations, logic, and basic professional survival principles completely. Yet the terrified young co-pilot also understood another brutal truth already unfolding. Beneath flashing warning lights currently, he was losing control. The Airbus shook violently while operating on one struggling engine, through the worst southeastern storm system reported that month nationwide. Warning alarms continued flashing across cockpit displays while altitude dropped steadily despite Jennings fighting the controls desperately afterward. Benjamin remained calm. That frightened Jennings more than anything else. Most experienced adults collapsed emotionally beneath pressure, overwhelming commercial aircraft emergencies across dangerous weather conditions routinely. Benjamin moved with deliberate precision, developed through endless simulator repetitions and years surviving foster system brutality silently afterward. No panic, no hesitation, only focus. "Move Captain Beckett away from primary controls," Benjamin ordered while adjusting nearby instrument settings carefully afterward. "The aircraft needs balanced handling during descent, or crosswinds could roll us completely." Jennings swallowed hard, then obeyed. Together, he and Grace Anderson carefully lowered Captain Beckett's body onto the cockpit floor beside emergency equipment afterward. Grace covered the dead pilot respectfully, using a folded airline blanket, while silently fighting tears threatening professional composure beneath flashing cockpit lights currently. Benjamin slid carefully into the captain's seat. For one strange, beautiful second, the surrounding chaos disappeared completely afterward. The screaming passengers vanished. The storm vanished. The fear vanished. Benjamin felt only the aircraft. Captain Davis described flying exactly this way during countless community center training sessions throughout 14 difficult months together carefully. "Airplanes speak constantly," Davis always explained while guiding simulator landings beside Benjamin patiently afterward. "Most people panic too loudly, hearing themselves instead of listening properly." Benjamin wrapped trembling fingers around the controls. The Airbus immediately felt alive beneath his hands. Heavy, injured, frightened, but still fighting. Another severe gust slammed against the fuselage while Flight 22136 rolled dangerously sideways through black storm clouds afterward. Benjamin corrected smoothly, using measured rudder pressure instead of aggressive oversteering movements currently. Jennings noticed instantly. The teenager handled turbulence better than certified pilots during advanced simulator evaluations routinely afterward. Benjamin pressed the radio transmit button. "Miami Center, this is Flight 20136 declaring Mayday," he announced steadily while monitoring unstable airspeed readings afterward. "Captain incapacitated. Right engine failure confirmed. Severe weather penetration at flight level 310. Request immediate emergency vectors and nearest suitable runway." Silence followed briefly. Then an older male controller answered carefully through radio static surrounding the storm-covered aircraft currently. "Flight 20136, identify yourself immediately," the controller responded professionally, despite obvious confusion, underneath controlled wording afterward. "Please state pilot qualifications for emergency coordination procedures." Jennings closed his eyes. Benjamin never blinked. "My name is Benjamin Townsend," he answered calmly, while another violent downdraft shook the cockpit heavily afterward. "I am 16 years old with advanced Airbus simulator emergency training. I currently possess no commercial license, but I can safely operate this aircraft." Complete silence returned. Even static disappeared briefly. Finally, the controller exhaled audibly through radio speakers afterward. "Flight 22136, copy your transmission," he answered slowly, while clearly choosing words extremely carefully afterward. "Remain on current heading temporarily while we coordinate emergency response nationwide." Nationwide. Benjamin understood immediately. Somewhere below those storm clouds, federal agencies, airline executives, and aviation officials suddenly debated whether trusting a 16-year-old black foster kid with 174 American lives represented courage or insanity tonight. The aircraft dropped again. Benjamin corrected smoothly. Grace watched him silently from behind the cockpit seats while holding Captain Beckett's blanket-covered body respectfully afterward. She spent 18 years inside Atlanta emergency rooms, recognizing panic, competence, arrogance, and courage faster than most people ever could naturally. Benjamin carried none of the arrogance common among gifted young men seeking recognition desperately. Only responsibility. Jennings interrupted quietly. "Fuel remaining 46 minutes, he reported while checking overhead panels nervously afterward. "Left engine temperatures fluctuating slightly above recommended operating limits already." Benjamin nodded once. Bad news kept multiplying. Another radio transmission crackled suddenly through static. Different voice, older, familiar. Benjamin, the voice said calmly through radio speakers afterward. This is Captain Earl Davis speaking from FAA Operations Coordination in Miami tonight. Benjamin froze completely. His mentor continued speaking. The FAA contacted me, asking whether you were real or some internet fantasy created during panic. Davis explained warmly, despite obvious tension underneath his steady tone afterward. I told them you are the finest natural pilot. I've trained across 52 flying years personally. Jennings stared, speechless. Grace covered her mouth emotionally. Benjamin felt tears threatening again beneath overwhelming pressure surrounding the cockpit currently. Captain Davis continued quietly. Remember your breathing, he instructed gently. Trust your training. Feel the airplane instead of fighting it aggressively. Benjamin swallowed hard before answering. Yes, sir, he whispered, while tightening exhausted hands around the controls once again afterward. Then Davis spoke 5 final words. The same words carved beneath Benjamin's wooden airplane model, resting beside flight instruments currently. The sky doesn't care, son. Benjamin looked through violent storm clouds, swallowing Flight 22136 completely afterward. And somewhere deep inside himself, fear finally transformed into determination. Inside the passenger cabin, rumors spread faster than panic through every crowded row aboard Flight 22136 afterward. People whispered desperately across seats while turbulence shook the aircraft violently through endless thunder surrounding them currently. The captain was dead. One engine failed completely. A teenager somehow controlled the airplane from inside the cockpit now. Nobody understood how. Many refused believing it entirely. The heavy-set businessman from row 31 stormed angrily toward the forward galley while gripping seatbacks for balance afterward. Fear transformed his earlier arrogance into ugly desperation beneath flashing emergency lighting throughout the trembling cabin currently. You're telling me a child is flying this aircraft right now? He shouted toward Karen Bellows while nearby passengers listened horrified afterward. This airline has completely lost its mind tonight. Karen blocked the aisle immediately. Only 30 minutes earlier, she treated Benjamin like dangerous trash, contaminating her professional environment unfairly. Now she defended him with fierce determination, surprising even herself beneath terrifying circumstances surrounding the flight currently. Sit down immediately, Karen ordered coldly, while maintaining direct eye contact with the frightened businessman afterward. That boy inside the cockpit is the reason you're still breathing tonight. The businessman opened his mouth angrily. Then another violent drop slammed passengers sideways throughout the cabin instantly afterward. He returned silently toward his seat. Pamela Hargrove remained frozen beside the window in row 33, while mascara streaked down trembling cheeks afterward. Every cruel accusation she directed toward Benjamin replayed endlessly inside her mind, alongside growing shame currently. She remembered demanding security checks. She remembered mocking his clothes. She remembered calling him dangerous. Now the same teenager carried her life inside his trembling young hands, somewhere beyond that cockpit door afterward. Pamela suddenly realized something devastating. Benjamin never raised his voice once against her cruelty, not once. Inside the cockpit, Benjamin monitored fuel calculations while fighting severe crosswinds through violent Alabama storm systems, currently afterward. Lightning illuminated cockpit glass repeatedly, while unstable engine readings continued fluctuating dangerously across instrument panels nearby. Craig Jennings followed instructions without argument now. The frightened co-pilot finally understood pride meant nothing compared against survival during catastrophic emergencies thousands of feet above American soil tonight afterward. Benjamin commanded the cockpit naturally, despite lacking uniform, license, or official authority anywhere nationwide. Miami Center returned over radio communications. Flight 2136 Chicago airports remain closed because of severe weather, the controller explained carefully through static afterward. Nearest available runway capable handling emergency landing located Randolph County Airport, northwestern Alabama. Benjamin listened closely. Runway length 5,200 feet. The controller continued reluctantly afterward. Surface wet with moderate standing water. Visibility 1/4 mile beneath heavy rain and fog conditions currently. Jennings stared horrified toward instrument displays. "That runway is too short," he whispered immediately afterward. "An Airbus requires more distance than that during one-engine wet approaches safely." Benjamin remained silent several seconds, his mind calculated rapidly. Aircraft weight, crosswind speed, fuel balance, hydraulic pressure, reverse thrust capability, runway braking conditions. Every variable mattered now. Outside, the storm worsened aggressively while Flight 22136 descended deeper toward violent cloud systems, swallowing surrounding skies completely afterward. Rain struck cockpit windows so hard, visibility nearly disappeared between lightning flashes, illuminating darkness briefly. Finally, Benjamin spoke. "We don't have another option," he said quietly, while trimming the aircraft carefully against worsening turbulence afterward. "Fuel remaining gives 42 minutes maximum before total emergency exhaustion." Jennings looked away. He knew Benjamin was correct. Somewhere below endless clouds and rain, one narrow wet runway represented the only possible path separating 174 terrified passengers from death tonight afterward. Benjamin adjusted heading slightly while remembering Captain Davis teaching emergency approach procedures during difficult simulator landings carefully. Davis always forced Benjamin practicing impossible scenarios repeatedly because real disasters never offered comfortable circumstances naturally afterward. "Anybody flies perfectly during calm weather," Davis once explained while shutting down simulator engines intentionally afterward. "Great pilots reveal themselves after everything goes wrong simultaneously." Everything had definitely gone wrong tonight. Grace Anderson entered quietly, carrying bottled water and emergency medical supplies from the cabin afterward. She paused briefly, watching Benjamin control the aircraft through violent storm conditions surrounding them currently. The teenager's concentration seemed almost supernatural. No wasted movement, no visible panic, only absolute focus. Grace suddenly remembered Benjamin sitting quietly near the rear lavatory earlier, while strangers treated him like unwanted garbage throughout boarding procedures afterward. America failed this boy repeatedly, yet tonight he still chose saving everyone aboard instead of surrendering bitterness afterward. Another violent gust rolled the Airbus sharply sideways through thunderclouds immediately afterward. Warning alarms flashed again while the left engine coughed dangerously beneath rising operational temperatures nearby. Benjamin steadied the aircraft carefully. Then the left engine produced a loud explosive bang, echoing throughout the cockpit afterward. Jennings looked terrified instantly. Their final engine had just become unstable too. The explosion from the left engine echoed through the cockpit like cannon fire inside a metal tunnel afterward. Every warning light across the Airbus instrument panel flashed violently, while alarms screamed through surrounding darkness currently. Craig Jennings grabbed the edge of his seat instinctively as engine readings fluctuated dangerously beyond acceptable operating limits. "No, dear, no, no," Jennings whispered repeatedly while staring toward unstable thrust indicators afterward. "We cannot lose the remaining engine tonight." Benjamin watched the instruments carefully. The left engine still produced thrust, but unevenly now. N1 readings jumped unpredictably between safe and dangerous ranges, while severe turbulence battered Flight 22136 relentlessly through Alabama storm systems afterward. The aircraft remained alive, though barely, like an exhausted fighter refusing collapse despite catastrophic injuries currently. Benjamin reduced thrust slightly. Jennings looked shocked immediately. "Why are you lowering power?" he demanded, while gripping emergency checklists desperately afterward. "We need every bit of thrust available right now." Benjamin shook his head once. "Too much stress kills damaged engines faster," he explained calmly, while trimming the aircraft against another violent crosswind afterward. "If the compressor overheats completely, we become a glider inside this storm instantly." Grace Anderson listened silently behind them while securing loose medical supplies across the shaking cockpit floor afterward. She recognized something remarkable happening beyond ordinary survival instincts currently. Benjamin wasn't reacting emotionally. He was thinking strategically. Outside the cockpit, passengers sensed worsening danger immediately through changes beneath the aircraft's movements afterward. The Airbus no longer shook rhythmically through turbulence alone. Now every vibration felt fragile, uncertain, almost terminal beneath endless thunder surrounding them currently. Pamela Hargrove clutched her seatbelt tightly while silently praying for the teenager she previously humiliated without mercy earlier tonight afterward. Nearby passengers cried openly while flight attendants attempted calming fears they secretly shared themselves throughout the increasingly hopeless cabin currently. Karen Bellows walked slowly down the aisle, checking seatbelts and oxygen equipment beneath flickering emergency lights afterward. She paused beside Pamela briefly. Pamela looked upward with tear-filled eyes. "Is he really flying this airplane?" she whispered shakily afterward. Karen nodded once. "Better than anyone else on board tonight," she answered honestly before continuing through the trembling cabin afterward. Inside the cockpit, Miami Center transmitted updated weather reports through heavy radio static surrounding the storm-covered aircraft currently. Flight 2136, Randolph County visibility decreasing rapidly, the controller warned carefully afterward. Additional lightning cells approaching final approach corridor from western sectors presently. Jennings cursed quietly beneath his breath. Benjamin studied navigation displays silently. The runway looked impossibly small against surrounding wilderness and violent weather conditions below currently afterward. Randolph County Airport handled small regional aircraft normally, not crippled commercial airliners, carrying 174 souls through catastrophic emergencies tonight. Yet no alternative existed. Fuel calculations confirmed it brutally. Benjamin adjusted heading gradually while descending lower through massive black clouds, swallowing every visible landmark completely afterward. Lightning illuminated rain curtains briefly before darkness returned even thicker across cockpit windows nearby. Then another problem appeared. Hydraulic pressure warnings. Jennings stared at the flashing amber indicator with horror spreading visibly across exhausted features afterward. "Hydraulic system B losing pressure," he reported immediately while flipping emergency checklist pages rapidly. Benjamin's jaw tightened. Hydraulic failures affected braking response, steering precision, landing gear systems, and flight control surfaces throughout commercial aircraft operations dangerously afterward. Combined with one unstable engine and severe weather, the situation approached impossible territory quickly. Still, Benjamin remained steady. Captain Davis once forced him practicing catastrophic compound emergencies repeatedly because reality rarely delivered disasters individually afterward. "Aviation punishes panic faster than mistakes," Davis always reminded during exhausting simulator sessions across countless weekends together carefully. Benjamin keyed the radio again. "Miami Center, Flight 2136 experiencing hydraulic pressure instability alongside remaining engine fluctuations," he reported calmly afterward. "Request all emergency services fully deployed before arrival at Randolph County tonight." The controller answered immediately. "Already done, Benjamin," the older voice replied warmly through static afterward. "Police, fire crews, ambulances, everyone available statewide responding toward that runway currently." Everyone statewide. Benjamin absorbed the weight silently. Somewhere below those storm clouds, complete strangers gathered in heavy rain, hoping a forgotten foster child from Miami could accomplish something trained professionals considered nearly impossible afterward. Altitude dropped below 10,000 feet. Turbulence intensified violently. The Airbus plunged suddenly through a brutal downdraft while passengers screamed throughout the cabin afterward. Warning alarms erupted again across cockpit panels while rain completely blinded the windshield momentarily currently. Jennings grabbed the controls instinctively. Benjamin stopped him immediately. "Trust the instruments," he ordered sharply while maintaining precise corrections against the storm afterward. "The aircraft still wants flying if we stop fighting emotionally." Then lightning exploded directly ahead. For one terrifying second, the entire cockpit illuminated bright white through endless sheets of rain surrounding Flight 2136 completely afterward. And Benjamin finally saw the runway approach path waiting somewhere below the storm. Benjamin guided Flight 2136 lower through violent cloud layers, while rain hammered the windshield like endless gravel afterward. The runway approach path flickered faintly across navigation instruments before disappearing again, beneath electrical interference from nearby lightning strikes currently. Every muscle inside his body ached from concentration, exhaustion, and relentless cockpit tension surrounding them tonight. Craig Jennings monitored emergency checklists while fighting visible panic beside him afterward. The co-pilot finally stopped seeing Benjamin as a frightened teenager pretending confidence during disaster circumstances currently. Now Jennings watched something else entirely: natural command. Benjamin handled chaos with terrifying calm. Altitude 7,000 feet, Jennings reported shakily while checking descent rates against unstable airspeed readings afterward. Crosswinds increasing beyond 20 knots from western sectors currently. Benjamin nodded once. The Airbus rolled suddenly beneath another savage gust, slamming against weakened flight controls afterward. Hydraulic warnings flashed brighter, while engine temperatures climbed dangerously close toward catastrophic overheating limits currently. Grace Anderson steadied herself beside the cockpit doorway while holding emergency medical equipment against the wall afterward. Through years working at Atlanta trauma centers, she witnessed surgeons freeze beneath pressure and exhausted nurses collapse emotionally during impossible emergencies nightly. Benjamin never froze. He never complained. He simply kept flying. Outside the cockpit, Karen Bellows moved carefully through frightened passengers while emergency descent procedures continued across the cabin afterward. Many travelers openly cried now, while others sat completely silent beneath dim flashing lights currently. Fear stripped away social masks quickly. The wealthy businessman from row 31 held another passenger's trembling hand despite never learning her name beforehand. A teenage girl prayed softly beside strangers who earlier ignored her existence completely during boarding procedures afterward. Pamela Hargrove stared toward the cockpit constantly. Every terrifying vibration reminded her that Benjamin Townsend could have stayed quietly inside row 34 tonight afterward. He could have watched adults destroy themselves through panic after enduring humiliation from nearly everyone on board earlier. Instead, he walked toward danger, toward responsibility, toward people who treated him terribly. That realization hurt Pamela more deeply than turbulence ever could currently. Inside the cockpit, Miami Center updated approach information through crackling radio static afterward. Flight 2136, Randolph County visibility holding 1/4 mile currently, the controller reported carefully. Emergency crews positioned alongside runway 18, wind gusts reaching 24 knots across final approach corridor presently. Benjamin studied instrument displays silently. The approach would require perfection. One mistake meant catastrophe. The damaged Airbus descended through another thick cloud layer, while severe turbulence shook cockpit equipment violently afterward. Rain blurred every external reference beyond the windshield completely beneath endless black storm systems surrounding Alabama currently. Then the left engine sputtered again. A harsh metallic cough echoed throughout the cockpit before thrust dropped sharply several terrifying seconds afterward. Warning alarms screamed immediately, while airspeed decayed beneath safe approach margins currently. Jennings looked horrified. "We're losing thrust again," he shouted while gripping his harness tightly afterward. Benjamin reacted instantly. He lowered the nose slightly while carefully balancing remaining engine power against dangerous stall conditions afterward. Captain Davis drilled these emergency corrections endlessly during brutal simulator sessions designed breaking emotional reactions permanently. Fly the airplane first, everything else comes later. The engine stabilized barely. Benjamin exhaled slowly. "She's still fighting," he whispered quietly while patting the control column almost affectionately afterward. Jennings stared sideways. "You talk about this aircraft like it's alive," he muttered nervously. Benjamin kept his eyes forward. "Every pilot knows airplanes feel fear too," he answered softly afterward. "You calm them down, or they stop trusting your hands." Another lightning strike illuminated the cockpit brilliantly. Then something appeared ahead through rain and darkness. Approach lights. Faint, distant, beautiful. Randolph County Airport finally emerged from the storm like a lighthouse guiding survivors through impossible seas afterward. The narrow runway stretched across soaked Alabama countryside beneath emergency vehicle lights flashing red and blue everywhere currently. Jennings swallowed hard. "Runway visual confirmed," he announced shakily afterward. Benjamin disconnected autopilot completely. The aircraft immediately felt heavier beneath manual control, while violent crosswinds shoved against damaged systems aggressively afterward. Every correction required delicate precision, balancing engine instability. Hydraulic failures and severe weather simultaneously currently. Altitude 3,000 feet. Passengers sensed the final approach beginning through pressure changes inside the cabin afterward. Some held hands, others prayed openly. Several simply stared forward, accepting whatever waited beyond the storm tonight currently. Grace looked toward Benjamin again. The teenager's face appeared strangely peaceful now, beneath flashing instrument lights afterward. Not fearless, resolved. Benjamin guided the Airbus lower, while runway lights grew clearer through sheets of rain surrounding Flight 2136 constantly. The wet pavement looked impossibly short beneath endless darkness, swallowing surrounding Alabama wilderness afterward. Then another warning alarm erupted suddenly. Hydraulic pressure dropped again. This time, much faster. The hydraulic warning alarm pulsed bright amber across the cockpit, while Flight 22136 descended through violent rain afterward. Benjamin studied the pressure readings carefully as numbers dropped faster than before beneath flashing instrument lights currently. Hydraulic System B controlled critical braking assistance and several flight stabilization components during landing procedures nationwide. Craig Jennings looked ready, collapsing completely. If hydraulic pressure fails entirely, manual braking response becomes unpredictable, he warned shakily while flipping emergency checklist pages afterward. On a wet runway this short, we might not stop before overrunning completely. Benjamin kept flying. Outside Randolph County Airport flickered through storm curtains beneath rotating emergency lights and endless Alabama rain currently. The narrow runway stretched ahead like a fragile thread, separating 174 lives from catastrophe tonight afterward. Altitude 2,000 feet. Crosswinds slammed violently against the damaged Airbus, while Benjamin fought maintaining glide slope alignment carefully afterward. Every gust shoved the aircraft sideways through darkness, like invisible fists hammering weakened systems relentlessly currently. Still, Benjamin remained steady. Captain Davis trained him for moments exactly like this throughout endless weekends inside the Overtown simulator afterward. Davis intentionally created impossible scenarios because real emergencies never respected textbook limitations naturally. Trust your instincts after training, Davis always reminded him quietly beneath humming fluorescent lights afterward. Your mind already knows what fear tries hiding from you. Benjamin trusted himself now. Inside the cabin, passengers braced for impact, while flight attendants shouted final landing instructions above roaring turbulence afterward. Karen Bellows strapped herself into a jump seat near the cockpit, while silently watching Benjamin through the partially opened door currently. She barely recognized the same teenager she humiliated earlier tonight. The boy from row 34 now carried himself with more composure than airline executives and trained professionals surrounding this nightmare afterward. Pamela Hargrove cried quietly beside the window while clutching broken pearl strands across trembling fingers currently. For decades, she believed wealth and status measured human worth automatically throughout American society. Tonight shattered that illusion completely. A forgotten foster child from Miami possessed more courage than everyone else aboard combined afterward. Altitude 1,500 feet. Benjamin lowered landing gear manually while hydraulic systems struggled responding through unstable pressure levels afterward. The aircraft shuddered heavily before 3 green indicators illuminated successfully across the instrument panel currently. Jennings exhaled loudly. Landing gear locked, he confirmed afterward. Another brutal gust rolled the Airbus sharply right, while warning alarms screamed again throughout the cockpit immediately. Benjamin corrected smoothly, using measured rudder pressure instead of panicked oversteering movements afterward. Grace Anderson watched silently. The teenager flew entirely through instinct now. No checklist could fully guide this approach anymore, only feel. Altitude 1,000 feet. Benjamin called for full flaps. The damaged aircraft resisted briefly before configuration changes slowed approach speed carefully afterward. Rain swallowed the windshield almost completely, while runway lights appeared and disappeared beneath violent storm bursts currently. Approach unstable, Jennings whispered fearfully while checking descent indicators afterward. Benjamin shook his head. No, he answered quietly while adjusting thrust with microscopic precision afterward. She's settling down finally. Altitude 700 feet. The left engine coughed again. Thrust dropped suddenly before recovering weakly afterward beneath flashing temperature warnings across instrument displays currently. Benjamin reduced stress immediately while maintaining glide slope alignment through worsening crosswinds carefully. Every decision balanced disaster against disaster. Too much thrust destroyed the final engine. Too little thrust stalled the aircraft. Too much braking caused hydroplaning. Too little braking sent them beyond the runway into darkness afterward. Altitude 500 feet. The runway finally emerged clearly ahead. Wet pavement glistened beneath emergency vehicles lining both sides through heavy rain currently. Fire crews waited beside flashing trucks while ambulances and police cars crowded nearby access roads afterward. The entire county seemed awake tonight. Watching, praying, Benjamin tightened both hands around the controls while disconnecting every remaining automated system afterward. Only him now, only instinct, only courage. Altitude 300 feet. The Airbus shook violently beneath another savage crosswind, while alarms screamed continuously throughout the cockpit afterward. Jennings gripped his seat helplessly while Grace silently whispered prayers behind them currently. Benjamin leaned slightly forward, his breathing slowed. His eyes locked onto the runway centerline, cutting through rain and darkness ahead afterward. Then the left engine produced one final terrifying sound. A loud metallic bang exploded through the cockpit, and thrust dropped toward zero. The metallic explosion from the left engine shook Flight 22136 like a bomb detonating beneath the fuselage afterward. Every cockpit warning erupted simultaneously, while thrust indicators collapsed toward zero across flashing instrument displays currently. Rain hammered the windshield so violently that runway lights disappeared behind grey chaos instantly. Craig Jennings went pale. "We've lost the last engine," he whispered hoarsely, while staring at dead thrust readings afterward. Complete silence followed. No roaring turbines, no comforting engine vibration, only wind. The Airbus had become a powerless glider, carrying 174 terrified souls through a thunderstorm above rural Alabama tonight afterward. Benjamin felt the aircraft change immediately. Commercial jets without thrust behaved differently beneath pilot hands afterward. Heavier, slower, more honest somehow. Captain Davis trained him repeatedly, handling total engine failures, because powerless airplanes revealed whether pilots truly understood flying principles naturally. Airplanes don't magically fall without engines, Davis always reminded during simulator shutdown exercises afterward. They glide. Panic kills people, not gravity. Benjamin refused panic. Altitude 200 feet. The runway centerline drifted sideways beneath brutal crosswinds, while hydraulic warnings flashed continuously across the cockpit afterward. Benjamin corrected carefully using rudder pressure alone, because aggressive movements now risked catastrophic aerodynamic stalls currently. Jennings stared helplessly. Everything airline training taught him depended upon functioning engines, stable hydraulics, and normal operational margins afterward. Benjamin operated beyond procedures now, beyond textbooks, beyond ordinary aviation. Inside the cabin, passengers sensed the terrifying silence immediately after engine noise disappeared completely afterward. Mothers hugged children tightly, while grown men openly wept beside strangers throughout the shaking aircraft currently. Karen Bellows gripped her jump seat harness while silently praying for the teenager she once treated like worthless garbage earlier tonight afterward. Pamela Hargrove buried her face inside trembling hands while broken pearls scattered across the floor beneath her expensive shoes currently. Nobody cared about status anymore, only survival. Altitude 100 feet. Benjamin focused entirely upon runway alignment while rain blurred every external reference beyond emergency lights afterward. The Airbus descended rapidly now, without thrust support, beneath severe weather conditions surrounding Randolph County Airport currently. Too fast, too steep, too dangerous. Craig Jennings swallowed hard. "Benjamin, we're dropping below safe profile," he warned desperately afterward. "Pull up slightly or impact forces could destroy landing gear completely." Benjamin listened, then ignored the advice. Captain Davis taught him something painful about emergencies years earlier afterward. Sometimes survival required choosing the least deadly option among terrible possibilities naturally. Pulling upward risked aerodynamic stall. Stalling guaranteed death. Benjamin kept descending, altitude 50 feet. The runway rushed toward them through sheets of rain, while emergency vehicles flashed red and blue beside soaked pavement afterward. Firefighters watched helplessly from below, while powerless Flight 2N36 fell through darkness currently. Then Benjamin spoke quietly. "Brace for hard contact," he warned, while tightening both hands around the controls afterward. The Airbus struck runway 18 violently. Main landing gear slammed against wet pavement, hard enough throwing passengers forward, despite seatbelts afterward. Metal screamed beneath enormous impact forces, while sparks exploded behind the aircraft through darkness currently. But the landing gear held. Benjamin immediately deployed manual braking. Nothing happened. Hydraulic pressure had failed almost completely. The Airbus continued racing down the rain-soaked runway without sufficient deceleration afterward. Emergency lights blurred past outside, while passengers screamed, realizing they weren't stopping currently. Jennings looked horrified. "Brakes aren't responding," he shouted uselessly afterward. Benjamin already knew, his eyes locked onto the rapidly approaching runway end while calculating impossible options beneath overwhelming pressure currently. Captain Davis once demonstrated emergency differential braking techniques during advanced simulator sessions long after midnight afterward. Dangerous, unstable, absolutely final. Benjamin grabbed the emergency brake handle manually, then he pulled. The aircraft lurched violently sideways while tires screamed against soaked pavement afterward. Smoke and water exploded behind the Airbus as wheels fought hydroplaning forces across the runway currently. Passengers cried out while overhead compartments burst open from brutal deceleration afterward. The runway end rushed closer, 200 feet, 150, 100. Benjamin held the emergency brake with both trembling hands while praying physics remained merciful tonight afterward. The Airbus finally stopped, 82 feet from darkness, 82 feet from death. For several sacred seconds, nobody moved anywhere aboard Flight 2136 afterward. Rain hammered the silent aircraft while emergency lights reflected across shattered puddles outside currently. Benjamin kept both hands frozen around the brake handle. Then his body finally started shaking uncontrollably. Silence filled the cabin after Flight 2136 stopped 82 feet before the runway disappeared into darkness afterward. Rain pounded against the motionless Airbus while smoke drifted slowly past shattered puddles outside currently. Nobody aboard seemed capable breathing normally yet. Benjamin Townsend still gripped the emergency brake handle with both trembling hands afterward. His shoulders shook uncontrollably now. Adrenaline finally crashed through his exhausted body after holding fear hostage during the impossible landing tonight currently. The aircraft no longer demanded perfection from him every second afterward. People were alive. Craig Jennings stared ahead blankly while trying to process what just happened beneath endless flashing emergency lights outside currently. Every aviation instinct told him the landing should have ended with fire, explosions, and scattered wreckage across Alabama fields afterward. Instead, they survived because a 16-year-old foster kid refused surrender. Grace Anderson stepped carefully toward Benjamin while emergency responders surrounded the aircraft outside afterward. She placed one steady hand gently across his shaking shoulder beneath dim cockpit lighting currently. "You brought them home," she whispered softly afterward. Benjamin closed his eyes. For the first time since entering the cockpit, tears escaped freely down exhausted cheeks afterward. He reached slowly toward the small wooden Airbus resting beside dead instrument panels currently. "The sky doesn't care what color you are." Captain Davis carved those words after Benjamin completed his first successful emergency simulator landing alone months earlier afterward. Tonight, those words felt heavier somehow. More true. Inside the passenger cabin, someone started clapping. Grace recognized the sound immediately. Karen Bellows, the same flight attendant who shoved Benjamin against beverage carts earlier, now cried openly while applauding through shaking hands afterward. Another passenger joined her, then another. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted. Passengers stood crying, cheering, hugging strangers beside them, while applause thundered louder than the storm outside afterward. Fear transformed suddenly into gratitude, too overwhelming remaining silent currently. The businessman from row 31 covered his face while sobbing uncontrollably afterward. The elderly passenger, who earlier grabbed Benjamin's wrist, bowed his head quietly toward the cockpit door. Currently, Pamela Hargrove couldn't stand. Shame rooted her motionless inside row 33, while applause surrounded the aircraft cabin afterward. Every cruel judgment she made about Benjamin replayed mercilessly inside her mind, beside the reality now confronting her currently. The teenager she treated like criminal trash just saved her life. Karen Bellows entered the cockpit slowly afterward. Benjamin looked upward nervously despite everything, because humiliation conditioned him, expecting cruelty from authority figures automatically throughout childhood currently. Karen collapsed onto her knees, tears streamed down her face, while guilt shattered every remaining professional wall protecting emotions afterward. She tried speaking several times before words finally emerged beneath painful sobs currently. "I am so sorry," she whispered brokenly afterward. "God forgive me for how I treated you tonight." Benjamin stared quietly. No anger remained inside him, only exhaustion. Craig Jennings removed his harness slowly before extending one shaking hand toward Benjamin afterward. The co-pilot looked humbled beyond words, beneath flashing emergency lights surrounding the silent cockpit currently. "I've flown with experienced captains who would have crashed tonight," Jennings admitted honestly afterward. "You saved every person aboard this aircraft." Benjamin accepted the handshake carefully. Outside, firefighters positioned emergency stairs beside the Airbus while paramedics prepared entering through heavy rain afterward. Television crews already gathered beyond airport fencing because word traveled quickly through emergency communication networks nationwide currently. A miracle landing, teenager pilot, commercial aircraft. The story exploded before passengers even unfastened seatbelts afterward. Grace suddenly remembered Captain Beckett lying silently beneath the blanket beside cockpit equipment currently. Joy faded briefly across her face afterward. One man still died tonight. Benjamin followed her eyes toward the fallen captain. He stood slowly before approaching the blanket-covered body respectfully afterward. Everyone inside the cockpit remained silent while rain hammered against surrounding metal currently. Benjamin placed one trembling hand gently against the blanket. "Rest easy, Captain," he whispered quietly afterward. No cameras recorded the moment. No passengers heard it. But Grace Anderson never forgot the tenderness inside Benjamin's exhausted voice afterward. Because even after enduring cruelty, terror, racism, and impossible pressure tonight, the teenager still carried compassion stronger than bitterness currently. Emergency responders finally opened the aircraft door. Cold, rain-filled Alabama air rushed inside immediately afterward, and the world waiting outside had absolutely no idea who Benjamin Townsend truly was yet. The aircraft door opened slowly while cold rain and flashing emergency lights flooded the cabin afterward. Firefighters climbed emergency stairs cautiously because nobody fully understood what waited inside Flight 2136 currently. Dispatch radios across Alabama carried unbelievable reports during the previous 20 minutes non-stop. A dead captain, total engine failure, teenage pilot, successful landing. Most responders assumed details became distorted through panic and confusion afterward. Then Benjamin Townsend stepped from the cockpit. The applause returned immediately. Passengers reached toward him while he walked carefully down the aisle beneath dim emergency lighting afterward. Some touched his shoulders gently, while others cried openly without embarrassment throughout the crowded cabin currently. Benjamin looked overwhelmed. He spent most of his life feeling invisible. Now strangers stared at him like something extraordinary afterward. A little girl from row 19 held out a stuffed teddy bear with trembling small hands currently. Benjamin knelt beside her seat despite exhaustion crushing every muscle afterward. "You keep him safe tonight," he told her softly while pushing the toy gently back toward her arms. The child smiled through tears. Grace Anderson waited beside row 33 afterward. Without speaking, she pulled Benjamin into a fierce embrace that lasted several long emotional seconds currently. Benjamin finally broke completely. He buried his face against Grace's shoulder while silent tears soaked her sweatshirt afterward. Years of loneliness, humiliation, fear, and pressure escaped, all at once, beneath flashing emergency lights currently. Grace held him tighter. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore," she whispered softly afterward. Then Benjamin saw Pamela Hargrove standing awkwardly inside the aisle nearby currently. The elegant, wealthy woman looked shattered. Her expensive blazer hung wrinkled and soaked beneath cabin humidity afterward. Broken pearl strands wrapped loosely around trembling fingers, while mascara streaked across exhausted cheeks currently. She stepped toward Benjamin slowly. "I owe you more apologies than one lifetime allows," Pamela admitted through shaking breaths afterward. "Tonight you saved me after I treated you like you were worthless." Benjamin stayed silent. Pamela lowered her eyes. "I've spent decades believing terrible things about people without ever saying them aloud honestly," she confessed painfully afterward. "Tonight forced me hearing those thoughts spoken directly through my own voice finally." The cabin remained completely quiet around them. Passengers listened carefully. Pamela looked back upward, with tears filling exhausted eyes afterward. "You deserved kindness from me," she whispered brokenly. "Instead, I gave you suspicion and cruelty because your clothes frightened my prejudices somehow." Benjamin studied her several seconds. Captain Davis once taught forgiveness mattered most when hardest offering sincerely afterward. Hatred multiplied endlessly unless somebody finally refused, continuing the cycle currently. Benjamin nodded slowly. "I forgive you," he answered quietly afterward. "Just remember this feeling next time someone reminds you of me." Pamela covered her mouth while sobbing openly afterward. No speech could undo what happened tonight. But truth finally entered her heart. Outside the aircraft, emergency crews escorted passengers carefully down wet stairs toward waiting buses afterward. Television cameras flashed constantly beyond security barricades, while reporters shouted desperate questions through pouring rain currently. Nobody cared about ordinary news anymore. America suddenly watched Randolph County Airport tonight. Craig Jennings emerged from the cockpit carrying Captain Beckett's flight bag respectfully afterward. Reporters immediately surrounded him with microphones and cameras, despite heavy police resistance currently. Jennings stopped walking, then pointed directly toward Benjamin, descending emergency stairs behind him afterward. "Talk to him," Jennings announced loudly enough, reaching nearby cameras through storm noise currently. "He's the pilot who saved everyone aboard that airplane tonight." Every camera turned instantly. Bright lights blinded Benjamin, while soaked Alabama rain drenched his faded gray t-shirt afterward. Police officers, firefighters, paramedics, reporters, passengers, everyone stared silently toward the exhausted teenager currently. Benjamin froze. Foster homes taught him attention usually meant danger afterward. But this crowd looked different somehow. Not hostile, not suspicious, hopeful. An older firefighter stepped forward first, beneath pounding rain afterward. His uniform sleeves dripped water, while emergency lights reflected across weathered features currently. The firefighter removed his helmet slowly, then saluted Benjamin. One by one, other first responders followed. Police officers, paramedics, firefighters. Complete strangers standing beneath cold Alabama rain, saluting a forgotten foster child from Miami afterward. Benjamin looked overwhelmed again. Then somewhere beyond flashing cameras and emergency vehicles, another familiar voice shouted through the storm currently. "That's my boy." Benjamin turned instantly. Captain Earl Davis stood beyond the barricades wearing an old Air Force jacket, soaked completely by rain afterward. And for the first time all night, Benjamin smiled without pain. Captain Earl Davis pushed through the crowd despite security officers trying controlling reporters around the emergency scene afterward. Rain poured from the brim of his old Air Force jacket, while television cameras captured every determined step currently. At 71 years old, Davis still carried himself like commanding officers from another American generation entirely. Benjamin ran toward him. The teenager who calmly landed a powerless Airbus moments earlier suddenly looked 16 again, beneath flashing emergency lights afterward. Exhaustion and emotion finally overwhelmed the disciplined mask protecting him throughout the nightmare tonight currently. Captain Davis caught Benjamin inside both strong arms. Neither man spoke immediately. Rain hammered around them, while reporters shouted questions nearby, and passengers watched silently afterward. Benjamin buried his face against Davis's shoulder, exactly like he did years earlier after difficult simulator failures inside the Overtown Community Center currently. Only this time he succeeded. Finally, Davis pulled back slightly. "You listened to the airplane," he said proudly, while gripping Benjamin's shoulders afterward. Benjamin nodded through tears. just like you taught me," he whispered quietly. Television cameras captured everything. Within minutes, clips spread across social media nationwide beneath captions calling Benjamin a hero, miracle pilot, and aviation prodigy afterward. But Captain Davis ignored every camera completely currently. To him, Benjamin wasn't a headline. He was family. Nearby reporters surrounded Craig Jennings aggressively, while emergency responders continued escorting shaken passengers toward waiting buses afterward. Jennings answered only one question repeatedly beneath bright camera lights currently. "Benjamin Townsend saved our lives," he kept saying firmly afterward. "Every single person aboard that aircraft owes him everything tonight." Inside a temporary emergency command center beside the runway, federal aviation officials scrambled coordinating responses nationwide afterward. FAA administrators demanded cockpit recordings, maintenance histories, and detailed statements from surviving crew members currently. Nobody remembered another case remotely similar. Unlicensed teenager, commercial Airbus, catastrophic systems failure, successful emergency landing. The story sounded impossible, yet 174 living witnesses stood outside proving it happened afterward. Benjamin sat quietly beside Captain Davis inside a heated emergency trailer while paramedics checked his pulse and blood pressure currently. The teenager finally looked exhausted beyond words beneath harsh fluorescent lights afterward. Dark circles surrounded his eyes, his hands still trembled slightly. One paramedic smiled gently. "Most grown pilots would have collapsed halfway through that approach," she admitted honestly while wrapping a blanket around Benjamin's shoulders afterward. Benjamin looked uncomfortable hearing praise. Captain Davis noticed immediately. "You need understand something important tonight," Davis told him firmly afterward. "Humility matters, but denying your gift helps nobody eventually." Benjamin stared downward silently. Growing up inside foster care taught him extraordinary people belonged elsewhere afterward. Rich neighborhoods, stable homes, prestigious schools, not broken apartment complexes hidden behind Miami laundromats currently. Captain Davis understood those thoughts without hearing them spoken aloud. "America spends billions searching talented children internationally," Davis continued quietly afterward. "Meanwhile, extraordinary kids grow invisible inside neighborhoods everybody ignores completely." Benjamin looked up slowly. Davis pointed toward the rain-covered runway outside the trailer window afterward. "Tonight, the whole country finally saw what I saw 14 months ago," he said proudly currently. "Not a poor black teenager from Overtown, a pilot." Before Benjamin could answer, the trailer door opened suddenly afterward. Karen Bellows entered hesitantly. Her eyes looked swollen from crying, while guilt weighed visibly across exhausted features currently. The proud, authoritative flight attendant from earlier seemed completely gone now afterward. She approached Benjamin carefully. "I resigned tonight," Karen admitted quietly while avoiding direct eye contact initially afterward. "Not because anybody forced me. Because I needed confronting who I've become, honestly." Benjamin listened silently. Karen swallowed hard. "I've spent years assuming dangerous things about people based upon appearances," she confessed painfully afterward. "Tonight nearly cost 174 lives because prejudice blinded me completely." Captain Davis watched carefully without interrupting. Karen finally looked directly toward Benjamin afterward. "You showed more grace under humiliation than I've shown passengers during 30 airline years," she whispered currently. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway." Benjamin remembered her shoving him beside the cockpit earlier tonight afterward. He remembered the hatred inside her voice. Yet he also remembered something else. Fear. Karen Bellows wasn't evil. She was frightened and poisoned by assumptions never challenged until disaster stripped them naked afterward. Benjamin nodded slowly. "Fear changes people," he answered softly afterward. "But courage changes them back sometimes." Karen broke into tears again. Outside the emergency trailer, reporters suddenly erupted into louder shouting, while camera flashes intensified across the soaked airport tarmac afterward. Someone important had just arrived. Captain Davis glanced through the window, then smiled knowingly. "Looks like Washington finally noticed you too," he murmured quietly afterward. 3 black government SUVs rolled across the rain-soaked tarmac, while emergency lights reflected against polished surfaces afterward. Secret Service agents stepped into the storm first, scanning the crowded airport scene with practiced precision currently. Reporters surged forward immediately behind barricades while cameras flashed non-stop through heavy Alabama rain. Benjamin looked confused. Captain Davis chuckled softly beside him. "Son, when you save 174 Americans during live national coverage, powerful people suddenly become very interested afterward." The trailer door opened again. Governor Elaine Whitmore of Alabama entered, surrounded by exhausted staff members and security personnel afterward. Her dark overcoat dripped rainwater across the temporary command center floor currently. Whitmore looked less like politician tonight and more like relieved mother, witnessing impossible survival firsthand. She walked directly toward Benjamin. No speechwriters, no prepared remarks, only honesty. "My state owes you every heartbeat aboard that airplane tonight," Whitmore said quietly while extending her hand afterward. Benjamin stood awkwardly before shaking it carefully. The governor studied him several seconds beneath harsh fluorescent lights currently. "How old are you exactly?" she asked almost incredulously afterward. 16, ma'am," Benjamin answered softly. Whitmore exhaled slowly. "At 16, I was worried about passing algebra," she admitted with tired admiration afterward. "You landed a crippled Airbus through catastrophic weather on a flooded runway tonight." Captain Davis smiled proudly nearby. Before Benjamin could respond, another federal official entered, carrying a tablet computer displaying live national broadcasts afterward. Every major American network covered the story continuously, now beneath headlines describing miracle landings and teenage heroism currently. CNN replayed Benjamin's Mayday transmission repeatedly. Fox News interviewed surviving passengers live. Social media exploded with hashtags celebrating the mysterious teenager from Miami afterward. "The sky doesn't care." Benjamin Townsend, Flight 2136 millions watched. Benjamin looked overwhelmed again. Attention frightened him more than storms somehow. Grace Anderson noticed immediately while standing beside emergency medical staff nearby afterward. She stepped closer protectively, like older sisters shielding vulnerable siblings during chaotic family disasters currently. "He's exhausted," Grace reminded everyone firmly afterward. "This child survived enormous trauma tonight too, not just the passengers." Governor Whitmore nodded understandingly. "Of course," she agreed, before turning toward Benjamin gently afterward. "But America deserves hearing your voice whenever you're ready." Benjamin hesitated. For years, nobody cared hearing his voice anywhere afterward. Foster parents ignored him. Teachers overlooked him. Strangers judged him, then chid him before conversations even started currently. Now cameras waited outside, broadcasting nationwide. Captain Davis leaned closer. "Just tell the truth," he advised quietly afterward. "Truth carried you through worse storms than television cameras ever will." Minutes later, Benjamin stepped outside beside Governor Whitmore while reporters erupted into shouted questions immediately afterward. Rain still poured heavily across Randolph County Airport, though nobody seemed noticing weather anymore currently. Bright lights blinded Benjamin temporarily. Microphones surrounded him, questions attacked from every direction afterward. "How did you learn flying procedures? Were you afraid during the landing? Did racism aboard the aircraft affect your decisions tonight? Do you consider yourself a hero?" Benjamin froze briefly. Then he remembered Captain Davis teaching simulator breathing exercises during difficult emergencies afterward. Slow inhale, controlled exhale, focus. He stepped toward the microphones calmly. The crowd quieted instantly. "I don't feel like a hero," Benjamin began softly, while rain soaked his faded gray shirt afterward. "Heroes are usually people who choose danger professionally every single day. Firefighters, nurses, pilots, soldiers." He glanced briefly toward the aircraft behind him. "Tonight I just used knowledge somebody cared enough teaching me," he continued afterward. "Captain Davis believed in me long before anybody else did." Cameras flashed constantly. Benjamin swallowed hard before speaking again. "A lot of kids grow up where I did," he explained quietly afterward. "Most never get opportunities showing what they're capable becoming because people decide their worth too early." The entire airport remained silent. Even reporters stopped interrupting. Benjamin looked directly into the cameras afterward. "Please don't wait until someone saves your life before seeing their humanity," he finished softly. Nobody spoke several seconds afterward. Then applause erupted across the rain-soaked tarmac, louder than thunder itself currently. Far away in Miami, foster children watching late-night television suddenly saw someone who looked exactly like them being celebrated instead of feared afterward. And somewhere deep inside America tonight, something uncomfortable finally began changing. By sunrise, Benjamin Townsend's face covered every major news channel across the United States afterward. Television anchors repeated his story beside dramatic storm footage and emergency landing animations throughout non-stop broadcasts currently. Americans waking beside quiet suburban kitchens suddenly learned about the forgotten foster child who landed Flight 2136. Miami reacted differently. Inside Overtown, neighbors crowded around televisions inside barbershops, laundromats, and corner restaurants afterward. Elderly residents who spent decades watching talented black children disappear beneath poverty and violence cried openly while recognizing Benjamin's neighborhood accent during interviews currently. "That's Lorraine's boy," one older woman whispered through tears afterward. That baby finally flew exactly like she promised years ago. At the Overtown Community Center, children gathered around the aging flight simulator where Benjamin trained every weekend afterward. Captain Davis's volunteer aviation program suddenly became national news beneath endless media attention currently. Reporters discovered uncomfortable truths quickly. The simulator survived years without federal grants. Local politicians ignored funding requests repeatedly. Corporate donors preferred sponsoring wealthier suburban youth programs afterward. Yet inside that neglected building, a miracle pilot emerged anyway. Across social media, millions debated Benjamin's story passionately throughout the following morning afterward. Some celebrated courage and perseverance, while others questioned how an unlicensed teenager operated commercial aircraft systems during emergencies currently. Former military pilots defended him publicly. Retired airline captains called the landing nearly impossible afterward. FAA simulations later confirmed survival odds below 12% under identical storm conditions currently. Benjamin ignored most headlines. He sat quietly beside Captain Davis inside a modest Birmingham hotel room provided by the airline afterward. Neither man slept much because adrenaline and emotion still pulsed through exhausted bodies currently. Captain Davis watched morning news silently before muting the television. "You know your life changed forever last night," he said carefully afterward. Benjamin stared downward. "I just want things feeling normal again," he admitted softly afterward. Davis smiled sadly. "Normal ended the moment you touched that runway alive," he replied gently. A knock interrupted them. An airline executive entered carrying folders and legal documents afterward. Two federal aviation officials followed behind him, while photographers waited outside hotel hallways currently. The executive introduced himself quickly. "Benjamin, our company wishes offering full educational sponsorship immediately," he explained afterward. "Flight school, college tuition, housing assistance, whatever path you choose pursuing aviation professionally." Benjamin blinked slowly. Nobody ever offered him stability before, not once. The FAA representative stepped forward next. "We're also formally inviting you to participate within advanced aviation development programs," she added respectfully afterward. "Your instinctive systems management during catastrophic failures impressed experienced investigators nationwide currently." Benjamin looked overwhelmed again. Captain Davis squeezed his shoulder proudly. Then another knock sounded. Grace Anderson entered carrying breakfast containers and fresh clothes purchased overnight afterward. Benjamin immediately smiled seeing her, because Grace represented safety now somehow currently. "Family." Grace handed him a new sweatshirt gently. "Thought you deserved clothing without duct tape this morning," she teased softly afterward. Benjamin laughed quietly for the first time since Miami. The sound surprised everyone. Then Grace's expression grew serious afterward. "Benjamin, there are reporters downstairs asking ugly questions already," she warned carefully currently. "Some people online claim you exaggerated your training or manipulated the situation somehow." Captain Davis rolled his eyes immediately. "America celebrates black excellence only after trying discrediting it first," he muttered bitterly afterward. Benjamin stayed thoughtful several seconds. Years inside foster care taught him success often attracted suspicion instead of support afterward. Society expected boys from neighborhoods like Overtown failing quietly, not performing miracles beneath national television coverage currently. Still, he looked calm. "People can believe whatever helps them sleep better," Benjamin answered softly afterward. "The passengers know what happened inside that cockpit. That's enough for me." Grace smiled proudly. Hours later, another unexpected visitor arrived at the hotel afterward, Pamela Hargrove. She looked completely different from the woman boarding Flight 2D-136 the previous evening currently. No expensive jewelry, no designer makeup, only exhausted honesty remained beneath sleepless eyes afterward. Pamela carried a large envelope carefully. She approached Benjamin nervously. "I spent all night thinking about every foster child nobody ever noticed," she admitted quietly afterward. "Including you." Benjamin listened silently. Pamela handed him the envelope. Inside rested legal documents establishing a scholarship foundation funded entirely through her family's charitable organizations afterward. The name printed across every page stopped Benjamin's breathing briefly currently. The Sky Doesn't Care Aviation Scholarship, dedicated to underprivileged children dreaming beyond society's expectations afterward. News crews camped outside the Birmingham Hotel for 3 straight days afterward. Satellite trucks lined nearby streets while reporters chased every rumor surrounding Benjamin Townsend relentlessly throughout national media coverage currently. America remained obsessed with the teenager who landed Flight 22136 against impossible odds. Benjamin hated the attention. Foster care taught him visibility usually created danger rather than opportunity afterward. Yet everywhere he traveled now, strangers recognized him instantly beneath airport terminals, restaurants, and crowded hotel lobbies currently. Some thanked him emotionally. Others simply stared. Captain Davis tried protecting Benjamin from overwhelming pressure while managing endless interview requests and scholarship offers afterward. The old pilot suddenly found himself speaking before senators, airline executives, and educational foundations nationwide currently. Nobody ignored the Overtown Community Center anymore. Corporate donors called daily. Federal grants appeared overnight. Politicians requested photographs beside the aging flight simulator they previously neglected for years afterward. Captain Davis accepted funding carefully but distrusted sudden generosity deeply. "America loves redemption stories more than justice," he warned Benjamin quietly one evening afterward. "Don't confuse temporary admiration with permanent change." Benjamin understood. Meanwhile, FAA investigators released preliminary findings regarding Flight 20136 publicly afterward. The report confirmed Captain Ronald Beckett suffered massive cardiac arrest 38 minutes before the emergency landing currently. Investigators also verified catastrophic compressor failure destroyed the right engine before hydraulic systems deteriorated dangerously. Most shocking remained the final conclusion: Benjamin's decisions likely saved everyone aboard. Professional simulation recreations showed certified pilots crashing under identical conditions repeatedly afterward. Aviation experts called the landing one of the most extraordinary emergency recoveries ever documented currently. Suddenly, universities competed offering Benjamin full scholarships: MIT, Embry-Riddle, Georgia Tech. The Air Force Academy even contacted Captain Davis personally afterward. Benjamin felt overwhelmed by choices nobody from Overtown usually received currently. One afternoon, Grace Anderson found him alone inside the hotel courtyard, staring toward passing airplanes above Birmingham afterward. He looked troubled, despite the world celebrating him endlessly currently. Grace sat beside him quietly. "Everybody thinks your life became perfect overnight," she observed gently afterward. Benjamin nodded slowly. "But it doesn't feel real yet," he admitted afterward. 3 days ago, passengers thought I belonged stealing wallets instead of flying airplanes." Grace looked thoughtful. "People change slower than headlines," she answered honestly afterward. "But some truly are changing because of you." Benjamin considered that silently. Across America, schools invited him speaking about perseverance, aviation, and racial bias afterward. Foster children sent handwritten letters describing impossible dreams they previously hid from classmates and counselors currently. A 10-year-old girl from Detroit wrote wanting to become aerospace engineer despite teachers discouraging advanced mathematics afterward. A boy from rural Mississippi confessed he memorized aircraft manuals secretly because classmates mocked his interests currently. Benjamin read every letter carefully. Then another storm arrived unexpectedly. Not weather, politics. A controversial television commentator criticized Benjamin during a live broadcast afterward. The host questioned whether media attention focused too heavily upon race instead of real aviation professionals currently. Social media exploded immediately. Supporters defended Benjamin fiercely. Critics accused networks exploiting emotional narratives afterward. Benjamin watched clips silently beside Captain Davis that evening currently. The commentator sneered directly into cameras. America shouldn't encourage unlicensed teenagers believing rules don't apply because they received sympathy from dramatic circumstances, he declared afterward. Captain Davis switched off the television angrily. Cowards attack brilliance whenever brilliance challenges comfortable assumptions, he muttered bitterly afterward. Benjamin surprised him by smiling faintly. Captain, that man would have ignored me completely before the landing, Benjamin replied calmly afterward. Now he feels threatened enough discussing me nationwide. Davis looked impressed. Benjamin continued quietly. Maybe that's progress too. The next morning, Benjamin attended Captain Beckett's funeral alongside surviving crew members and passengers afterward. Rain fell softly across the small Alabama cemetery while military honors recognized Beckett's 26 aviation years currently. Pamela Hargrove stood several rows behind Benjamin, holding white roses silently afterward. Karen Bellows attended too, though she remained near the back, overcome with lingering guilt currently. After the ceremony ended, Captain Beckett's widow approached Benjamin slowly afterward. Everyone nearby became silent. The grieving woman carried folded American flags and trembling composure beneath grey skies currently. She stopped directly before Benjamin, then embraced him tightly. Ronald would have trusted you completely, she whispered through tears afterward. Thank you for bringing his passengers home safely. Benjamin closed his eyes. Somehow those words meant more than every television interview and scholarship combined afterward. Benjamin returned to Miami 1 week after the emergency landing aboard Flight 236 afterward. Television helicopters circled above Miami International Airport while crowds gathered behind security barriers carrying homemade signs currently. Reporters described his arrival like returning war heroes from older American generations somehow. Benjamin hated every second. Fame felt unnatural against memories of foster homes and overlooked classrooms afterward. He still expected strangers judging his shoes before hearing his name currently. Yet Overtown welcomed him differently. Neighbors lined cracked sidewalks outside the community center cheering while children waved cardboard airplanes painted blue and silver afterward. Elderly residents cried openly from apartment balconies overlooking streets most politicians visited only during elections currently. For the first time, Benjamin saw pride replacing survival inside his neighborhood. Captain Davis walked beside him quietly through the celebration afterward. The old pilot noticed Benjamin becoming overwhelmed beneath flashing cameras and emotional strangers currently. Remember where your feet stand, Davis murmured softly afterward. The world changed around you. You don't need changing yourself. Inside the renovated community center, workers installed brand new flight simulators, donated after national attention exploded afterward. Corporate logos decorated walls, while federal grant announcements arrived hourly through email notifications currently. Benjamin stopped suddenly. Dozens of neighborhood children sat inside folding chairs, staring toward him with wide, hopeful eyes afterward. Black children, Latino children, poor children. Kids' society usually overlooked completely. One little boy raised his hand nervously afterward. Mr. Benjamin, he asked quietly, do you think somebody like me could become pilot too someday? The room fell silent. Benjamin remembered being that child once, invisible, hungry, dreaming privately because hope felt embarrassing afterward. He knelt beside the boy carefully. Somebody like you already did, Benjamin answered softly afterward. Several adults began crying immediately. That afternoon, Benjamin visited his mother's grave for the first time since childhood afterward. The cemetery rested beside busy Miami highways where traffic noise mixed strangely with ocean winds currently. Lorraine Townsend's grave marker remained small and weathered beneath years of neglect afterward. Nobody visited regularly because nobody besides Benjamin remembered her anymore currently. Captain Davis waited respectfully nearby while Benjamin cleaned fallen leaves away from the stone afterward. He traced her name gently. "You were right," he whispered quietly afterward. "I finally flew." Tears came again, not from fear this time, from grief. Benjamin suddenly wished his mother lived long enough, witnessing what her forgotten son became afterward. Every cruel foster home, every hungry night, every racist insult aboard Flight 22136 somehow hurt more remembering Lorraine never saw him survive them currently. Captain Davis approached slowly. "Your mother already knew who you were," he said gently afterward. "The rest of us simply caught up later." That evening, Benjamin received another unexpected visitor afterward. Craig Jennings arrived carrying Captain Beckett's old flight logbook, carefully beneath one arm currently. The young co-pilot looked healthier now, though guilt still shadowed his exhausted expression afterward. "Captain Beckett's widow wanted you having this," Jennings explained while handing over the worn leather book afterward. Benjamin opened it slowly. Inside the final completed page, Beckett recorded notes before departing Miami currently. Experienced storms, worse during military transport years. Young co-pilot still nervous under pressure. Need mentoring. Benjamin smiled faintly. Then another line near the bottom caught his attention afterward. Interesting kid boarded wearing faded grey shirt. Watched him studying engine sounds during taxi. Reminds me why flying still matters. Benjamin looked stunned. Captain Beckett noticed him before the emergency. Before the chaos. Before the miracle landing. Jennings nodded knowingly afterward. "The captain mentioned you quietly after takeoff," he admitted softly currently. "Said your eyes looked like real aviators watching aircraft behavior instinctively." Benjamin closed the logbook carefully. Somewhere deep inside, another painful weight lifted afterward. Captain Beckett died knowing Benjamin belonged inside that cockpit all along. Outside the community center, evening airplanes crossed above Miami beneath fading orange skies afterward. Children pointed upward while discussing aviation schools and engineering dreams instead of gangs and prison sentences currently. And Benjamin Townsend finally understood something extraordinary. Saving Flight 2136 wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of countless others. Autumn arrived slowly across Miami 3 months after Flight 2136 changed Benjamin Townsend's life forever afterward. The storms faded, tourists returned, and television networks chased newer tragedies across American headlines currently. Yet some changes refused disappearing quietly. The Overtown Community Aviation Center expanded faster than anyone imagined possible afterward. Federal grants funded modern classrooms, while retired pilots volunteered weekly mentoring neighborhood children currently. Corporate sponsors donated uniforms, textbooks, and advanced simulators previously reserved for wealthy suburban academies. Every child wanted learning aviation now. Benjamin visited often between college preparation interviews and flight academy evaluations afterward. Despite scholarship offers from elite universities nationwide, he still preferred sitting beside nervous beginners inside the simulator room currently. He remembered exactly how impossible dreams once felt. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Benjamin watched 12-year-old Marcus Rivera complete his first successful emergency landing simulation afterward. Marcus jumped from the cockpit cheering, while classmates applauded throughout the crowded training room currently. Captain Davis laughed proudly nearby. "You're creating monsters now," the old pilot teased afterward. "These kids might become better pilots than both of us eventually." Benjamin smiled. "Good," he answered softly afterward. Meanwhile, national conversations surrounding Flight 22136 continued evolving beyond aviation circles currently. Universities taught ethics courses analyzing passenger prejudice aboard the aircraft afterward. Airlines introduced expanded bias awareness training for flight crews nationwide currently. Some Americans resisted those conversations angrily. Others finally listened. Pamela Hargrove changed most dramatically afterward. She sold one of her Palm Beach vacation homes and redirected millions towards scholarship programs supporting foster youth pursuing science and aviation careers currently. Critics accused her transformation becoming performative guilt management afterward. Pamela ignored them. She spent weekends personally mentoring scholarship applicants instead. One evening, she visited Benjamin quietly at the community center afterward. No cameras followed anymore currently. Only honesty. "You saved more than our lives that night," Pamela admitted while watching children practice flight procedures nearby afterward. "You rescued me from becoming the worst version of myself permanently." Benjamin considered her words carefully. People rarely changed completely overnight, but some genuinely tried afterward. Captain Davis's health began declining quietly during those months too currently. Years flying military aircraft and surviving combat missions finally caught him physically afterward. Benjamin noticed the old pilot hiding coughs and fatigue during training sessions increasingly often currently. One night after closing the center, Davis sat beside Benjamin watching airplanes cross dark Miami skies afterward. "You've surpassed everything I could teach already," Davis admitted calmly currently. Benjamin shook his head immediately. "Never," he argued softly afterward. Davis smiled knowingly. "That's exactly why you'll become extraordinary professionally," he replied afterward. "Great pilots remain students forever." Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Davis grew serious. "Promise me something," he said quietly afterward. Benjamin looked over. "When this world inevitably disappoints you again, and eventually it will, don't let bitterness ground your spirit permanently," Davis continued afterward. "People like us survive by refusing hatred ownership over our hearts." Benjamin remembered Flight 22136 instantly. The insults, the suspicion, the fear. Yet he also remembered applause afterward, forgiveness, humanity. "I promise," Benjamin answered firmly afterward. Weeks later, Benjamin received official acceptance into Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, alongside direct airline cadet sponsorship afterward. News outlets covered the announcement briefly before moving toward other stories currently. Benjamin preferred it that way. Real life felt quieter than television narratives afterward. On his final evening before leaving Miami for college orientation, Benjamin walked alone through Overtown afterward. Streetlights reflected across wet sidewalks, while distant music drifted from apartment windows currently. Years earlier, he wandered these same streets feeling invisible, forgotten, disposable. Now children recognized him instantly afterward. A small girl riding bicycles with friends stopped suddenly beside him currently. "You're the airplane guy," she whispered excitedly afterward. Benjamin laughed softly. "Something like that," he admitted. The little girl grinned brightly. "I'm gonna fly someday too," she declared, confidently, before pedaling away afterward. Benjamin watched her disappear beneath glowing streetlights while airplanes crossed silently overhead currently. Then he looked upward toward the endless night sky once more, and for the first time in his entire life, the future no longer frightened him. 5 years later, passengers boarding commercial flights across America sometimes recognized Captain Benjamin Townsend before departure afterward. Not because advertisements celebrated him endlessly, or television networks replayed Flight 22136 constantly anymore currently. People remembered his calm voice. The boy who once announced through storm-filled radios that he had no license but could still fly the airplane afterward. Now he wore captain's stripes proudly. At 21, Benjamin became one of the youngest commercial pilots ever certified through accelerated aviation programs nationwide currently. Aviation schools studied his emergency landing for years afterward. Airlines invited him speaking about resilience, crisis management, and ethical leadership beneath pressure currently. Benjamin accepted some invitations. Others he declined quietly. He preferred flying. The sky still felt more honest than crowds and cameras afterward. Captain Earl Davis attended Benjamin's official captain ceremony despite worsening health complications afterward. Age bent the old pilot's shoulders slightly now, but his eyes still carried fierce pride currently. After the ceremony ended, Davis handed Benjamin the same carved wooden Airbus model from years earlier afterward. The wood looked worn smooth from countless nervous fingers and impossible memories currently. "Time returning this permanently," Davis said softly afterward. Benjamin held the model carefully. "The sky doesn't care what color you are." Those words shaped his entire life somehow. Captain Davis passed away peacefully 8 months later afterward. Hundreds attended the funeral, including military veterans, former students, airline executives, and children from Overtown currently. Benjamin delivered the final speech. His voice nearly broke throughout every sentence afterward. Captain Davis taught forgotten kids believing impossible things about themselves, Benjamin said quietly while staring toward the American flag covering the casket afterward. Then he stayed long enough proving those impossible things were actually true. Years continued moving afterward. The Sky Doesn't Care Scholarship Foundation expanded nationally, funding aviation and engineering programs for thousands of underprivileged students currently. Pamela Hargrove dedicated the rest of her life supporting foster children publicly and privately afterward. Karen Bellows never returned working airlines. Instead, she became counselor for bias rehabilitation programs, helping transportation workers confront prejudice honestly afterward. Grace Anderson remained close with Benjamin too, becoming family through shared trauma and quiet loyalty currently. As for Flight 2136, the aircraft itself never flew passengers again afterward. Engineers restored portions carefully before placing the cockpit inside a National Aviation Museum currently. Visitors still stop before the exhibit daily afterward. Children press their hands against the glass. Adults read the plaque silently. One sentence always captures attention longest. The aircraft was safely landed by 16-year-old Benjamin Townsend after catastrophic systems failures and pilot incapacitation. But another line beneath matters more. Talent exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. Late one evening, long after becoming Captain Townsend officially, Benjamin piloted a routine commercial flight above the southeastern United States afterward. The cabin lights glowed softly, while passengers slept peacefully beneath endless dark skies currently. His co-pilot noticed Benjamin smiling toward the stars outside the cockpit window afterward. "What are you thinking about?" she asked casually. Benjamin glanced downward toward distant city lights scattered across darkness afterward. Somewhere below rested Overtown, the library where he studied aircraft manuals secretly. The community center where Captain Davis believed in him first. The broken streets that almost convinced him dreams belonged elsewhere afterward. Benjamin smiled softly. "Just remembering where the flight started," he answered quietly afterward. Then he adjusted course gently while the airplane moved smoothly through peaceful night skies ahead currently. The same sky that once watched a frightened foster child board Flight 2136, wearing second-hand shoes and carrying impossible dreams afterward. The same sky that never cared about his race, poverty, or background, only whether he could fly. And Benjamin Townsend could. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.